Hello, this is the Family Retort here. Today we're talking a little bit about a more controversial topic that both have different ideas on, and this is AI art. I am for it with some caveat, and Aurora is generally against it.
I hate it so much. But I understand that that is a lot of my own bias, and I have complicated feelings about it ethically and just professionally because I consider myself a creative who does art, and I think that my idea of things is just very different from how people think about things.
And we've been arguing about this one for a while now, so
Quite a long time. How many? I feel like we spent 6 hours total arguing about this, at
oh
least.
man, just about. There's some good off-air stuff that we recorded that probably won't make it anywhere, but it's still
I
pretty
sure
interesting
hope we edit some
conversation.
of it in there.
So for now, I kind of want to make a general argument of technology. So when technology comes up, or a new piece of technology, there's 7 phases I feel people go through. And I'm going to run you through all of them and see what you think of this. Uh, if you agree with it, sure. If you don't agree with it, I would like to know because I think this is rather interesting. So when something pops up, usually people go, "Oh, don't bother me with this nonsense. It'll never work." Next phase is, "Oh, okay, it's happening, but it's dangerous because it doesn't work well." Number 3 is, "Wait, it works too well. We need to hobble it, do something." And I feel like we're about at this stage for AI.
Yes, I agree we should hobble it.
No. And then stage 4 is, "This stuff is so powerful that it's not fair to those without access to it," which we're also kind of at too. I feel like we're in between. This was working too well, do something, and this stuff is so powerful. But number 5 is, now it's everywhere, and there's no way to escape it. Not fair. 6 is, I'm going to give it up for a month. And then 7 is, well, let's focus on the real problem, which is the next current thing.
I
Uh,
don't necessarily disagree, and I think that it's interesting that I'm the one who has the conservative opinion on this because I understand how important progress is because I a lot of things that we consider minor conveniences, I need to be able to live life at all. Like grocery delivery and stuff like that. I wouldn't be able to function without it.
so,
And so I understand that we do need emerging technology. However, I do think we need to consider how that emerging technology is going to affect us in the future and what that is going to mean and what that is going to change. For example, social media has polarized us politically. That's part of why we're doing this podcast, right? Was we feel like we can't have even reasonable discussions between people anymore because people are so polarized. And part of that is because of the AI algorithms of social media and the ethics of that has
well,
polarized people so much
I think things have gotten a little extreme, but for
because people hadn't thought the ethics of those algorithms because they were built exclusively for engagement and not on other considerations that are important. And so that's why we need to think about these things and talk about these things because there's more than just one thing, which is progress when we're considering new technology. It's not just progress. It's, well, who's this going to help? Who's this going to hurt? How is this going to change things? Why? Which ways do we want things to change? And what's good and what's bad? What is this going to mean? What social supports do we have in place? What do we need to put in place? There's important considerations that need to be made. Like, for example, when the Luddites, they destroyed the emerging technology of the looms, right? What they were concerned about was how technicians were going to be forced out. And they were not incorrect because we now see how much worse fashion has gotten in sweatshops and in people's living circumstances. Before, being a weaver and a loomer and a seamstress, they were not, they were decently well paid professions. They were not the like fanciest thing, but they were a profession that was respected and that was paid. They had I don't know if they exactly had unions, but they had a certain degree of safety. And once we had a new technology that disrupted that, they were allowed to circumvent human rights and human decency and wages and all these other things and put people's actual health at risk. And that is still a problem today, over 100 years later.
Okay.
So it's not just about, oh, technology bad. It's about what are the consequences of the technology we're developing and how is that going to affect society in the future. We can't just blindly accept new things. And I understand that I'm very conservative sounding when I say that.
Okay. So I do kind of want to explain how AI art works, because I think a lot of it comes to disconnect of exactly what happens. Because people think it's just, it's just copying images. So what AI art does is it uses it as reference points. So I'm going to use kind of one of the examples we talked about before, where it pulls up samples. So you have, let's say, 35 different samples, 35 different images that it's going to draw inspiration from. And I use inspiration in quotes, of course. So it goes, okay, what are the elements of this word prompt that were given to me? So let's say we were doing, which one was it? Honeycomb dress, right? Earlier.
Yes.
And it came out with a pretty janky image because we only gave it 2 words. So it's pulling from those 2 words. It's going honeycomb and dress.
Well, and what's interesting is that the data sets are weighted more heavily towards dress. So you mostly just got a dress.
So what it did was it pulled up different images off of honeycomb, and then it went off of dress. So it took all these images it found and went, okay, what is the quote-unquote dress aspect? And then what is quote-unquote the honeycomb? So we got mainly a lot of yellow things, and I use the term dresses very loosely. They're pretty janky, but you had to input more data for it to figure out what you wanted in your mind, right?
Yes.
So then it used more of those samples and tried to compile an image, essentially, from different reference points. So it uses, okay, I see all this stuff. Now I'm going to try and make my own. Not necessarily copying what's up here from the points. It's trying to replicate it. Do you kind of understand how that works?
I do kind of understand. I think that it's a lot more complicated with what data sets that an AI is using, et cetera, because, there's overfitting, underfitting, all these other things. And that is something that I have mentioned in our other conversations, like why there's a bias towards naked, white, busty ladies that are, and, an overfitting bias of the internet, of a preference for that. And that's why AI images have a preference for that.
Yeah.
And so
and
that is one of my ethical concerns with it, actually.
So
is the fitting of the images and stuff of its sample bias almost.
Okay, so let's go into sample bias. This is kind of a good segue. So I know a lot of people are very upset that they're essentially quote unquote copying images, right? So they're using their pictures for references. Well, I found some interesting stuff online. So I'm going to talk a little bit about appropriation art. Now, if you're unfamiliar with appropriation art, I know this is something we've never talked about, and this is all new to you, right?
Yes.
So, appropriation art is quite literally taking somebody else's image and using it as their own. Now, this sounds horrible, right? Why are they taking credit for something they didn't do? So, appropriation art basically helps us see the context of pictures. I think it's absolutely integral to the meaning and reminds us that pictures don't just have history, they exist in history. And copies, no matter how perfect, is never really the same as the original, since the context is always shifting. So it puts that in perspective. So when artists copy, we recognize that they are making a fresh meaning through different signs and symbols and bits of information.
Fair, although I would like to point out that the image and reference in your argument that is being used is a thing using it as not an exact copy, but using the images as more as reference images than exact copies.
So, okay, something else with appropriation art too, and this is going to make you think about this one. I gotta find it. So, appropriation art, which AI art can be kind of classified as, if you really think about it, is sought to understand how images around us inform our psyche and provide a bias for collective life. It makes you think and question what value is added to a signature and what kind of people historically have been authorized to sign works in the first place, i.e., white men throughout history. So, a black female can take one of these pictures that somebody else has done. Like I said, generally high art, you're going to find a very limited pool of people. Take that, put it on a gallery wall, and say, now, who authorizes these people to put this and call this art?
Eric, I absolutely, absolutely adore this point because I'm so I'm so I'm so glad you brought this. So I really am curious about why you think that AI art is appropriation art, and I would love to hear you think about, hear your thoughts on who the AI art is appropriating and who is using the AI art technology and who that's appropriating.
So, you know, it's all right. Let's break this down into like each individual questions so I can kind of break it down for you. So go ahead.
Okay, so my first question is like, why do you think AI art is appropriation art?
So I think it can. I don't personally agree with that assessment, but as a whole, I can see where a lot of people would classify that as. Mainly because it is using a large basis of reference material that has been used from other artists. So, artists created X, Y, and Z image, and the AI generator goes to those images and pulls those files. So, from that standpoint, technically, that is appropriation.
But you feel different personally?
Yes, because I kind of can understand the coding behind it. It uses them as references more so than direct copies. So it's saying
So you
more.
don't feel like it's a direct copy, but you're saying that for people who feel that AI art is appropriation art, for people who say that AI art is a copy, appropriation art is a
Yeah,
good
it's a good stand-in, if
counterpoint.
that makes sense. It's a good stand-in. So people are going, "Oh, this is copying my work." Well, it's not really copying it. It's using it as a reference. But because people don't quite understand that, you could, you know, classify that under the umbrella of appropriation, if that makes
I
sense.
would Okay, that does make sense. I think that it's a little bit more complicated than saying, "Oh, this isn't copying." I think it's more about artists saying, "This is using my art is without my permission, without my consent, without my knowledge, without my explicit." Uh,
Yes. So I'm going to go to a. I'm glad you brought this
and
up.
and my next
Oh, hold
question
on.
is
Hold on.
for this
Hold
point.
on. Hold on. Hold on.
Okay.
Let me make this point before I lose it. So, recently, the Supreme Court actually made a decision on something like this. And this was Andy Warhol versus Prince. So, the Prince estate, and this was as of 2022. So, last year, as of recording. Do you know what the Supreme Court decided? So, what happened was Andy Warhol used a picture without the consent of the photographer of Prince to use in one of his screen prints.
Hmm.
The Supreme Court decided in favor of Andy Warhol Foundation, including that the photograph, even without permission, was fair use because it was transformative.
I understand that legally that might be the case. I think that how the artist community views it is different and often fraught. There is a case where somebody painted a direct copy of somebody's photograph and submitted it and won it to a contest. And the photographer is trying to dispute it, even though it was basically a direct copy of that photograph. And a lot of the artist community thinks that that is not fair use, but the
Well, if we want to,
authorities say that it's fine. So I think that artist community and legality and ethics are a little bit more complicated. But if we want to go back to the original point about if we're going to go use the point that AI art is a appropriation art as a copy as fair use,
sure, yeah.
if we're going to go on that point, who do you think is being appropriated and who do you think is doing the appropriating?
So, if we want to boil it down to that, I think the people who are using AI art are essentially appropriating people who have their art as references, I guess. Again, I don't quite I think it's a little bit more complicated than just, oh, these are the victims.
Well, what is the demographic that is using AI art technology?
So I'm glad you brought this up because it is people like me who understand computers but don't understand, I would say, two-dimensional art. I, for the love of me, do not understand perspective. I do not understand lighting. I don't get shading. It's just these concepts don't click in my mind. And I know for you it's very easy. And I know you've done a lot of work with it. But for me, I can do three-dimensional stuff, but trying to figure out how to draw like that is just baffling. And I've tried to do it before and I gave up. Sure, I'm sure if I would have done years and years and years and years of it, maybe.
Well,
But
no, I think it's fair if you don't enjoy the process to say, you know what, I should it's like better serve my time doing things that I enjoy and that I'm good at.
yeah,
You're very technical, you're very smart. I think that something that's you brought up as a great point of AI art, what appropriation art is who is allowed to make art is cishet white men in power. And when appropriation art is people with marginalized backgrounds reinterpreting that art and changing that context. But what I see is who is the demographic of people who are using AI art is
I
white
th-
people
I think,
who are
well,
men, who are in
so,
software tech
you
professions,
know,
and who are the creators of a lot of these art things. It's not like digital artists are rich, you know. A
but
lot of them are not even US citizens. A lot of them are marginalized creators and people of color. So I think that using the idea of AI art as appropriation art as a buffer to saying, as a counterpoint to saying, oh, this is copying, is kind of misunderstanding the idea of appropriation art, then, if that's the point. Because it's just white men stealing from people of color again, or marginalized people again.
well, the point of the appropriation art.
Especially when they bring profit into it.
So the point of the appropriation art, though, is to subvert the expectations, right? They're literally taking, copying what's already done and labeling it as their own to either elicit anger that they're doing that or to question what actually is art. So you're saying that basically who has the power in this situation?
Yes. So I think that I understand that you think that appropriation art as a counterpoint to copying it, but I think that what it boils down to is artists do not like their stuff being used without their consent, because neither of us exactly think it's explicitly copying, because we do understand a little bit more about the AI. But I do think that artists do deserve to have a right about what their stuff is being used for, and I think the real problem is who has the power in both the use of AI art and in appropriation art. Appropriation art is questioning who has the power to create art and stuff like that.
See,
And AI art is a lot of, I mean, not all white guys who have cushy tech jobs are using AI and art and stuff like that. It is a lot more nuanced than that. But I do think that a lot of the defenders I see online are people who have very busy jobs that pay them well, who do not have time to make art. And a lot of people who create art are people who are not in the US, and sometimes people like me who we can't get a normal job.
see,
And this is the only thing we can do. And so when our work is used without our consent, that really takes away people's livelihoods and
but why do
something a
you
lot
do?
more than that.
Hold on. Why do you do your art? Do you do it to try and make money, or do you do it because you enjoy doing it?
Personally, I do it because I enjoy doing it, and that's why I don't post it on the internet. But I also have support, and I do not need to make money from it in the same way that other people do. Because once I have to enter the job market, that my only choice is a creative field. I literally can't do anything else. Like I have been trying to force myself to learn other skills, and I just can't. And it's not like just how much like you want to learn how to do 2D art and stuff like that, but you're like, I just can't do it. I can't wrap my brain around it.
Yeah, and
I
that's
physically can't do anything else. Like I physically can't create anything else. So I understand. I'm I empathize with the frustration, and I empathize with not even having the time or energy or even the desire to want to put time into something that you're just, you know what, this isn't for me, right? I get it. And that's honestly why I think being a human being is great. That's why I love people. I love that we are so different and diverse. I think it's great that we enjoy different things, right? I like that I'm creative, and I like that most people do not want to be creative, right? I would be useless. I would be so useless if everybody wanted to be creative.
so. I'm going to circle back real quick. So you're saying, who is? I'm going to answer this question for you, by the way.
Thank you.
Who is the AI art for, right? And you were saying like, oh, it's just for primarily white men.
Well, I
I
think who is using it and who is profiting from it is because I know that you do not personally believe that people should pay for AI art.
Yeah, and we can circle
But
to that
but
a
the
little bit later.
the software developers and the people who are owning these sites, they are white men. and
Yeah.
they are selling it and they are profiting from it, and the artists are not having the same say on if their art is being used for a resource for this technology or not, and that is the crux of the problem,
Okay.
is that power dynamic.
Okay. I'm going to answer the question now.
Okay, sorry.
But these people are making it, yes, some places do charge you, but there's more places that don't. And this opens it up to everybody. Everybody, regardless of your skill level, can go in and make something. And we'll talk about the monetization stuff a little bit later. But for this point, this is using this tool, this technology. Like, you can get Stable Diffusion for your computer with a little bit of research. It's not that hard. And start doing this stuff yourself. Anybody can do this.
Well, the program you have is 16 gigs, right?
Sure. I mean, that's almost nothing in this day and age. That's like a game.
But it's almost crashing your computer when you use it. How many people, I mean, do you think people in developing countries even have enough internet to use that? That is like a pretty
I don't think people in
US
developing countries really care about AI art.
They don't. So that's the point, right? But a lot of people in developing countries do create art and post it on the internet and make money from it online because they don't need as much money to
Okay.
make money from their art
So
as other people do, right?
here's the foil
So
for you
AI
on this.
art does. So, yes. Okay, continue.
So here's the foil for you on this. Well, let's say these developing countries get access to the internet and they don't have those skills. So they go, okay, well, I'm going to make a business model off this AI art. So I just raised myself out of poverty using this AI art. I mean, you can flip it around any way you want for that point.
How do they do that? Because
I-
my point was just that AI, who is that for? It is for people in developing countries with money and who have very little time because they have a well-paying job, who do not want to pay somebody to make art for them.
Sure, any corporation is going to take the easy way out.
I didn't even mean corporations, but that
Well,
is
anybody.
definitely going to be used. But yeah. So, my point was just the limitations of who it's for and that power dynamic.
Okay.
But we agreed on that.
Yeah.
That was our.
You can agree.
We completely. Let's move on.
All right.
We don't care about this anymore. We're tired.
So here's something too. If a person took an image from Google, basically copy pasted it in unmodified on an existing network, would that be considered theft? Or if they used a piece of an image and reworked it in a version of in a version of their own, that's not considered theft, right? That's considered fair use.
Well, how are they using it?
For their own art. So they take an image, they can either like sketch over it, throw a filter on it, do minor adjustments in Photoshop or Instagram or whatever the hell you use, right? And then they go, "This is my image."
Well, I think there's a distinction between doing it for themselves, for public recognition, and for profit.
I mean, what's the difference? Because you're using it for either like clout, to get more followers on Instagram, which gets you more money, or even just selling it outright. I mean, I don't agree
personally
with
think
that
that
to
there-
begin with, but
I personally think that there are a lot of nuances in that level. And so
here's
I
the
think
thing:
that there
people
are.
consider that art.
I think that they do. However, there are a certain level of ethics to it. For example, in the cosplay community, you tag your photographer. If you do not tag your photographer, like that's really rude. And not tagging for cosplayers if you pose and pretend you made all of it, and we found out that you had been buying it from other people and not tagging or crediting them, that is like a huge no-no in the cosplay community as a personal creator standpoint, and you don't even make money from that. That is just from a personal clout standpoint, right? So that is already an ethical concern in artistic communities. That is a boundary that we have decided to make. And it is not something that I had intrinsically known or thought about personally until I had joined a community. And that is the difference between being an on your own artist and being in a community, is you need to respect other people's work and other people's boundaries and other people's, you know, efforts, and you need to credit them and you need to do all these other things. That's partially why sometimes I don't post that much, because I do not have the energy to figure out who took XYZ picture of me, because I don't remember.
So
And so I just don't post it, because to post it without credit is such a sin in our community.
here's something I wanna talk about. Andy Warhol, right? Would you consider him a pretty famous and well respected artist, right?
Technically, he is considered an artist, and he did change the idea of art. He created art as a business, a mass-produced thing. I have read I've listened to a really interesting audiobook that kind of talked about him, and I respect it. I do enjoy some of his art and stuff like that. I appreciate what he did, and part of what he did was he created a new boundary and he changed things, and I get it.
And I feel like that's kind of where we're at, where this is kind of the new boundary, right? But even when he came out with his
But
stuff, it was very controversial.
it was very controversial, but I still think, right, like, so for example, he used that like Prince's photographer's thing without permission. I think that using somebody's image without their permission is ethically wrong.
But
I think
it
that,
was
like, in our
transformative.
community, it doesn't, in our community,
Uh,
you need to ask. You're supposed to ask models if it's okay to use their picture. Like, just because it's legally okay doesn't mean
so
ethically and within the community it's
there it is.
acceptable. And so when the AI artists do these things, it is shown that they did not reach out to the AI artist community, and they do not want to be part of the artist community,
But
because I think they would have known that
that's
if they
the
had
interesting
tried.
thing about art, though. It's subjective, where you may not consider that ethically acceptable. Somebody else considers it legally fine and acceptable in their books, and he did it. He went, I want to turn this picture into a vision that I want to do.
To be
And
fair, what Andy Warhol did was like 60 years ago, and things have changed a lot since then, right?
well,
Pictures are much more common. Likeness is much more personable and profitable, and your personal brand matters much more now
so
than
I'm
it did
gonna
then.
I'm gonna leave you with a quote of his, by the way. So, an artist's job is not to offer up new images of beauty, but to reproduce what society has already approved. He basically
Ah, that's so horrible!
he
I'm
blurred the
sorry, I
line.
literally got the heebie-jeebies.
So here's his idea is he basically blurred the line between the factory worker and the artist. That's what he did.
I understand and respect that as a
You may
artist
not
is
agree with
breaking
it,
ground.
but that's
Yes,
what he did for art.
sure.
And
I accept that that was groundbreaking at the time. And I can also say that the ethics of art have changed, and art community has changed since then. And that the AI is groundbreaking in art. It does challenge our question of what is art, and that is subjective. I can appreciate a skilled AI image technician, even if I think it's ugly. I can appreciate that it does take a certain level of skill, even though I think that it is a shame, because people should have time to work on art, and that we lose something when we don't physically work on stuff. I think we physically spiritually lose something, and we are more depressed as a society when we don't get to make stuff physically and enjoy things. But that is just my personal opinion, and a very heavy bias because I do enjoy art, and I I would be depressed if I did not make art. And so I understand that not everybody enjoys it to the same degree that I make it, but I know that you do other physical things that
Yeah.
you create. So, you know, I still think that there is some kernel of truth that people need to be making things.
So here, like I said, I'm going to give you a little bit of my perspective for a minute. So I do ceramic stuff, right? You know this.
Yeah.
Not a lot of people do. Well, when you're making or throwing stuff, right? You're going to, let's use the word appropriate other people's works because you go, "Oh, how did they do that? Let me try and replicate that on the wheel or in other ways," right? So I just come from a different background where, I go walk through the studio. I see half a dozen pieces that are exactly the same. Not necessarily because they decided to all everybody copy each other, but that's just working on
Well, there's only so
forms.
many ways you can shape a bowl, and a lot of that is craftsmanship, right? There is, I think that in pottery, craftsmanship is a certain level of it, and technician skill, right? When you're learning a skill,
Yeah.
part of that's you're doing so easy.
I mean, you're going to come out with a lot of crappy pieces that all look the same. And I guarantee you they're all going to look the same as your neighbor and the person next to you when they're all kind of at that skill level.
Right,
But
well, that's
then,
part of the
right?
learning process in normal art too. And I have we had somebody who was a babysitter who had a master's degree in ceramics, and she created this like sweet pea sauce container that looked like a sweet pea and stuff like that. That was really cool. That's not as common.
Ah,
That's
then
a more
that's,
advanced level of skill.
and that's kind of what we did chat about this too, and I want to kind of use this as an example. I think AI art, I know you think it's just going to flood the internet. So there's so much, and we won't be able to differentiate regular humans art and AI art. I think AI art kind of has a distinctive look, right? It's just kind
It
of an
does.
amalgamation of a whole bunch of different stuff, which is basically what it is. What I believe will happen is, yeah, there's going to be some very upset people because that's what their stuff looks like, right? But what this is going to do is enrage people. Sure, it's already doing that. Great job there. But then you get the people going, okay, well, I need to take a step back. How do I make this unique? How do I make this basically float to the top? How do I do something different that the AI can't do, right? And I think that will pivot the art on the internet as a whole in a very good direction. And yeah, it's going to suck and people are going to get pissed, but it's just a natural kind of thing. And that's kind of what happens in ceramics too, right? At a certain skill level, you kind of take a step back. Well, good artists do this and go, okay, what can I do to differentiate myself from the rest of the crowd? What is something? And you need to tap into that creative nature. And I guess I'm just kind of optimistic at this. And, I kind of like AI art. It's okay, right? There's some cool stuff, and I have fun playing around with it. But, you know, I respect and understand that human made art has a different feel to it, right? And if
Yeah,
I like
actually,
something of a person's, I'm going to get that from them.
I think I just must think a little bit less of people than you do. Because that actually leads into one of my questions of why do you think people consume art? I think that why I consume art and why I think people should consume art doesn't seem to follow the patterns of why so many people do seem to originally get fooled by AI art. Part of it is a lot of people don't know, right? They think somebody created something and they think it's cool, and so I'm seeing it shared in all my Facebook groups, which where AI art is not relevant because we're talking about real 3D things
Yeah.
that I'm like, what does an image have to do with this? I'm so confused. But so my question is, why do you think people consume art
Okay.
then?
I'm going to
If
answer this, and I'm going to also kind of go into the next thing with this. So,
okay,
I think surface level, I consume art for a different reason than other people, right? I
I think I think we all have our unique reasons.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think generally though, when you boil it down, people enjoy the aesthetic. They like how something looks. I don't think anybody can argue with that, right?
That's true. I also enjoy beautiful things.
Yeah. Who
And
who doesn't? Honestly.
once I learn the meaning of something, it does change how I view something, right? Like originally I thought brutalist architecture was very ugly, but once I learned that it meant about utilitarianism and caring about people and not spending money on frivolous things, I was like, well, I understand now. It's
Nah.
less ugly in my eyes.
Art
And
Deco all the way.
I'm an Art Nouveau fan, so
Ugh.
it's
Anyway,
all the swirly things, you know?
that's a
I love all
conversation
the
for another
swirly
time.
things. But
So, I'm going to kind of go into some solutions cuz we're kind of running at that time.
okay.
Um we disagree. We both have our reasons. I do think that if you are using AI art, you need to be using it as a tool and not for monetary reasons.
Yeah, I think we agree on that one.
Yes, I think that's a big thing. And I think that either that needs to be specifically stated up front, saying, hey, this is AI, or have like maybe not necessarily a watermark, but something you can have like metadata in the picture that says this is taken from whatever, you know. You see that all the time with like camera pictures, right? If you look at the metadata,
Personally, I think a watermark might be necessary because people are very stupid and they need an immediate understanding.
fair enough.
Like, not all of, like, I'm not technologically literate enough to look at the metadata. I'm only artistically literate enough to know to look to count how many fingers there are.
But even some like AI generated art is getting to the point where they can start eliminating that weird jankiness of it.
Well, and some people will Photoshop it, and,
Yeah, that too.
points to them. You can, I mean, there's a lot of stuff that I'm seeing on Facebook now, and I'm like, I can't tell if I can like this or not because it kind of gives me AI art vibe. And I can't tell if it's just generic that somebody made or if it's AI art now. And
I mean,
it's
that's
hard, especially for stuff that's not human beings, like for architectural influence stuff. It's a lot harder because I don't know that as well.
so. Here's my other solution too, and if people are really bothered by making money off of AI generated art, well, here's the funny thing: those images cannot be copyrighted if they're AI art. So you can go and steal their stuff and then start selling it as your own to undercut them. Well, I use that as a very like cynical way of getting back at them, right? So you can go to all the websites that are trying to benefit from AI art
I
and then
agree, and we hope people do that. And my
collectively just
counterpoint
screw
is
over those people.
that the scammers, they don't care. They can create endless images, and the people who don't know better are still going to get scammed,
So
especially for images that people create, pretend it's their art, and people unknowingly buy
here,
it.
here's a
And
question
the
for
people
you.
who did put a lot of effort into their AI images, the real skilled technicians, they're going to be just as screwed over by that,
So
you know?
I'll give you a hypothetical. I'm a consumer, right? Just your every average day consumer. I don't know anything about AI art or human art, right? I go online and I enjoy this image. Who cares? Why does it matter to me whether it's AI art or human art? I enjoy the image for the image itself. right? I am going to use my money to make a print of that.
Do people enjoy images for the image itself?
Yeah, I do.
Because I think that a lot of people enjoy images, especially art, for what it represents. Like, that was what changed when the Impressionists came. Like, that art was like propaganda, it was representative, it was it expressed an idealist, and then the Impressionists changed it to be, I guess maybe I just align more with Impressionists too, but they changed it to be an idea of something, the feeling of something. And so
Well,
art captures a feeling, an idea of something, and people align with that idea and feeling of the art. It's not just the aesthetics,
not
it's the meaning and
all the
feeling
time,
behind
though.
it.
Not all the time. So, I enjoy surrealism art, right? Not because I'm getting some sort of emotion or feeling off of it. I'm enjoying it for the absurdity of it.
That is a feeling from it. I also enjoy surrealism. I enjoy surrealism specifically because it cannot be a photograph. I enjoy surrealism because it stretches your mind. It gives a feeling of the unreal. It is almost like trying to put an image and a feeling into a vibe that you cannot possibly understand.
Yeah.
It is, but that surrealism is a perfect example of
So,
something. You don't just
oh,
appreciate the image, you appreciate the idea behind it, right? For
so
like
okay.
example, Dolly with the melting clocks. To me, when I see Dolly with the melting clocks, I connect with my ADHD and my inability to understand time.
So, I got something for you.
It's not just, oh, melting clocks cool. It's ah, this conceptual understanding of time melting.
Well, like MC Escher does a lot of those things too. But here's what I'm gonna say, right? So I like Hieronymus Bosch. I know you're not too familiar with him. He was an old, I want to say like early painter. I would say his stuff is super surrealism before surrealism was even a movement. I'm interested in more pictures that he would make, right? So I consumed all of his work. Now I'm sad because there's no more of that. Well, let me go to my AI generated and make something in the style of Hieronymus Bosch. And I am a happy camper because I am getting the surrealist wet dream because this is insanity on my computer that I just made. That's just for me.
Isn't that just like a dopamine hit?
Does it
Isn't that just
matter?
the same thing as eating candy?
Sure, why not?
Does it bring meaning to your life though? Does
Yeah,
it?
because
Does
I'm
it?
enjoying
Because I feel like
conceptualizing something that I could never do. I could never
because
come up with a Hieronymus Bosch painting, but the AI generator can get some simulation of it, right?
because to me, a painting that somebody created, an AI will never be anything. It'll be nothing. To me,
Well, it's
what somebody
obviously
created
something
is
because it's
so
an
centered,
image.
and that image means dust. To me, a a painter is what, to be fair though, right? We talked about how I am an artist. I created all my life, and even though my parents took me to museums, like my favorite museum as a kid was the Museum of Natural History. Even though I was a snob and said real artists don't color art like other people's art, real
Ah,
artists color their own art.
you know,
Okay,
it puts something in
I was
perspective.
8.
Everything is put into perspective now. It makes complete sense. All right.
But so to me, when I learned about not like art history, when I learned about
Yeah.
the Etruscans and the Minoans and this pottery and this, that, and this
Yep.
technology meant this and that technology and that, even fashion history, like how when feminism became big, we wanted women to have more masculine silhouettes. So we had a more masculine, skinny style. And that's why skinny women became more into fashion because it was more androgynous. That's when we have fashion, like feminism waves. That political history, that historical things, the material effects of people and how that influences the art, people's ideology, those all matter. And the AI, well, the AI is just trying to make new things of a mush of that. It's almost a bastardization. It's like vomit to me.
And
It
I
is,
disagree.
it is, I can understand how it appeals to other people. I understand that you can get a dopamine hit from like, ooh, pretty image, but I think that that is part of what's so
So
why people are so depressed about our life now, because we can get all these easy dopamine hits without actual meaningful things anchoring us.
so I'm gonna kind of close out on this thought because we've been talking this for actually really like 3 hours at this point, but we've only been recording for about an hour of it.
Yes. Yes, it is.
I
It is really late.
I want to leave you with this, and I know I kind of said this, but for our viewers out there, let's boil art down to its basic, I guess, definition. Right? Art elicits some sort of emotion. And AI art is doing a great job of that right now. Like, I don't agree with modernism and some contemporary stuff. I think it's all trash and garbage and it shouldn't be classified as art. Comma, but in that rage that I feel towards that, it is doing its job as art. And we were looking at AI generated pictures earlier, and you were saying, "Ooh, I don't like that image. That's creepy." Right then and there, AI art is doing art.
I think the existence of AI images and the programming itself is a work of art, and I will accept the technological craftsmanship that had to create it. I think for me, what AI art stands for and what it means and will come to the future and how people will consume and change fills me with despair as I see how we will change for it, and it makes me worried. I can see how we could change things for the better. We could have all of our contracts say you must pay people to do things, but I know that we won't. I know that we will just undercut things in the way that our society has. I see this as a symptom of a of a of a continuing problem where we don't value artists and we don't actually value art. Again, we value them as just pretty pictures to mindlessly consume, as to escape our drudgerous, terrible lives endlessly on the computer.
So cynical.
And that's so sad to
So
me,
cynical.
because I think that life is so much more, and art is so much more, and people are so much more. And I wish better for us. I think that AI art could be a wonderful tool, but that it won't be, because we do not desire to put the protections in place and to use it as it could be used for the benefit of people. I think it'll be falling to the lowest common denominator because of our capitalist system. And I think that it's ugly.
All right. And with that, next week we will be talking about diversity. Thank you for coming, and hope you got something
Thank,
out of this. This was an interesting one. And like
thank
I
you guys
said,
for listening. We appreciate you listening for us for the ride. If you think that we missed any good points about AI art, we would love to hear it.
all right, bye.